Public staff, officers to the Infrastructure Committee and declare the meeting open. Just deal with apologies. Have an apology from Her Worship the Mayor. Just had to step out for a moment, so she may be late and early departure. Any other apology? Anyone else has to disappear early? Or move the apologies be received. Moved Councillor Courtney, seconder. Councillor Laurie. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Confirmation order of the business as per the agenda. There's probably two extra matters I'll bring up in my chair's report as verbal matters, but the agenda as otherwise in the agenda. Meeting is being live streamed. Councillor.
Item number 3, update the industry register. I've resigned as a board member of the NCMA as of yesterday.
Okay. Right, thanks for that. Just a reminder, microphones when speaking and recommendations, usual practice, they'll be up on the displays. Any amendments will be shown in red. Haven't been given any notice of any proposed amendments or changes, so I assume there are none. But there's no change of any other items. Notice the interest, and Councillor Rainey talked about his resignation from NCMA. Just be alert to any interest that you've got, and if you're potentially conflicted, just take the appropriate action. Next item is public forum. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Ollerenshaw. Welcome, Peter. I think you're well known to everybody, so over to you.
Thanks for this opportunity. Thanks for this opportunity. NELSAS is concerned that we might be missing an opportunity to improve mobility infrastructure at little cost. Recently, and I'm not sure if this is still happening, but Stoke footpaths were upgraded with just a footpath and no bike path. What we're asking is for you to consider a different default footpath design. So we're actually suggesting a two-tier system, and the first area is on cul-de-sacs and quiet dead-end streets. Now, I'm not sure if you can read this, but it says piccolo trotto, and that's what we're asking you for is a zone that's a piccolo trotto zone. It's a tiny trot. It's a low-speed zone in cul-de-sacs and quiet dead-end streets. Just go to the next one. So what we're asking here is for it to be a real shared zone with no curbs, just streets and bollards, no demarcation between where people walk and people drive, where the cars are guests. And I'm sorry, but Locking Street and Ewa Road, which are called shared zones, are really not functioning as shared zones. They look like roads, they feel like roads, they don't feel like where kids could be playing on the street. So what we're asking you is in these quiet cul-de-sacs, dead-end streets, is to create, in effect, these Vornoffs, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Dutch idea. This is the signs they have. They're actually 15k speed limits, where you can expect kids to be kicking balls. There's crucial aspects of it. You can't see straight through it. Doesn't look like a road. You have build-outs. You have different paving. It doesn't have to be expensive paving, but it's a different paving to a normal road. And like the planting build-outs could be like at the bottom of Hampton Street. At the moment, it could be temporary trial planter boxes that just mean you can't see straight through. It doesn't look like a through road. Yeah, and if you can't do this sort of thing, it is not working. Okay, so that was for quiet streets. Now for the other streets that aren't these dead-end cul-de-sacs and quiet streets, this is what we're proposing. And I'm going to talk about this slide for a bit, so I'm sorry if you get bored, but this is in Munich. It happens to be my son, but he was just showing us around. And this is their standard footpath design, where they have a footpath that's, in this case, it's on the right, it's against the properties, with a consistent paving treatment throughout the whole city. And in this case, it might be expensive, but it's consistent. It's pavers, but with the services underneath it, and those pavers can be removed for when the services are going through and put back, and you wouldn't know that they'd been moved. If there's tree roots that are pushing them up, they don't have to be ground down, they can be pulled out and re-levelled without grinding big slabs of concrete. The cycle path is clearly demarcated with a tiny curb between it and the footpath, and if someone wants to overtake another person, if the way's clear on the footpath, they can do that, but they know that they're not supposed to be riding down the footpath. And then on the road side, you've got the planters that gives that transition between the road height, the lower road height and the higher paving height, and it also gives a place to have street trees that, as we intensify, we're going to have more of our big trees in the street, not expect them to be on people's land. And so I think we need trees on every street, not just some streets, but every street, big deciduous trees. So that they drop their leaves, okay, it's an issue picking the leaves up, but they drop the leaves and they let the sun in winter. In summertime, you've got this delicious shade right through. Okay, so this, just to show you how this paving treatment is consistent throughout the whole town. This is again in Munich, and I hope you appreciate how difficult it was to get this. I was on my fold-up Brompton chasing this woman on her bike, and these Bromptons are quite lively steering, and so I was taking this with my phone with one hand. But it is consistent paving throughout the whole thing. You see, if you're on the right, you're on the paving. You're on the walk area, and you can see that this guy here, he's just overtaking someone, and he's just nipping onto that paving to overtake. And again, consistent, the main roads, the same. And crucially, at intersections, what we're asking for is that the paving goes straight through at the same paving level. So this is a proposal for Grey Lynn. Now, they've got their cycle lane in a different place that I don't think is the right place. It's against the car doors, so the car doors open and you hit it. You don't have the people biking in a more pleasant space on the away from the street further, and on the inside of the trees and berms. That's where it needs to be. But what this is illustrating is the raised footpath and cycle path that cruises straight through its side streets. So the giveaway is kept back from the corner, but what that means is that we need to enforce these setback corner requirements that are in the residential areas, 1.5 metres back from the corner. This is what you have to do with new builds, but what we're suggesting is that you enforce this for existing situations as well, so that you've still got those sight lines even though the cars are set back behind those streets cruising through. Just going. So with this default thing we're calling for, this default design we're calling for, it doesn't actually have to be very wide. So here we've got like a metre cycle path, a 700 mil cycle lane, and 800 mils of tree planting. So it's only 2.5 metres. It's not. We're not saying we have to move the curbs out. This is something we can do with our existing infrastructure when we're replacing them. Yeah, and just to, I don't know how I'm off for time, but just a quick anecdote that if you have to put a sign up that says a speed limit, you've actually done wrong. You haven't got things right. At the architecture school, we were told that if we had to have a sign that said this is where the entrance is, you've your building's a failure. And the same thing is that the actual street should talk to you about what's an appropriate speed in an area, you know. You know, if you see that you're not going to barrel through there at 50k, you don't need a sign that says 20k max. You'll still have that, but you're not relying on the signage. It's the vibe of the place that must be right. And just, okay, this is the last thing. I was actually banned from talking about this as a transport issue from the AT's Regional Transport Committee meeting. I think this is an example of siloed thinking that we're trying to mitigate against, where we're thinking that footpaths are not part of the transport system. Yes, it's infrastructure, but the RTC needs to direct the infrastructure team to create the infrastructure that's going to give this modal shift that we're looking for. That's it. Cheers.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks heaps, Peter. Great presentation. The Munich street or the Munich street design that you showed us actually reminds me of what we've got in Niles Street at the moment. Would that be the closest example in Nelson? Yep. And right, yeah. And just one question, because we looked at that slide, another question, looked at that slide that's of a treatment plan for Grey Lynn in Auckland, which looked a lot like Collingwood Street, part of Collingwood Street. And you said that their design you didn't like because the cyclists were near the car doors there. If you go back to the other ones in Munich, you've got some with there. That's the same problem, isn't it, there? Yeah.
So, yeah.
But that's still better than not having separate.
Well, it's crucial. There's a crucial difference.
Microphone?
There's a crucial difference there, because if the car door opens and you hit it, you're not thrown into traffic where you're going to get run over. Mm. That's the crucial difference. If at the moment our cycle lanes are on the outside of cars, if that car door opens and you hit it, you're probably dead by someone running you over.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Huge difference.
Down there inside.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah, I've got a question in terms of those. Have they got one on each side of the road, Peter? So how would we? Because we often just have footpaths on one side of our street. How would you anticipate? Would you anticipate that cyclists could be going two-way down that narrow strip? I mean, I guess it's doable if your population is small enough. And so then they would they'd move into the footpath to pass each other if they're meeting. How do you anticipate that works?
The way it works in Munich is that the expectation is that you ride the same way as the cars drive.
But what if we only have one cycleway? So we often don't have footpaths on both sides of our street, so I'm anticipating that people might be biking on against the traffic. Like, we might only have room for one footpath and one cycleway. So how do you allow,
this is where you'd have a two-way lane on one side, and you can do it by taking some of the parking, but you see what I've done here is that part of the parking lane is used for the cycleway, but you have alternative parking on each side of the street, so you still got parking on each side of the street. People don't need to cross the road if they're visiting someone. They might just need to park further along the road. And it also helps to slow down traffic because the centre line sort of snakes down the road.
Great, so does it need to be slightly wider? Because you said
it does. Yeah, if it's two-way, it does.
Yeah. A metre?
Oh, I think it's wider than that, I don't know. Okay. Transport engineers, 1.2, I don't know, 1.5, it needs to be a bit wider if it's two-way.
Great, because that's what we were looking at on Rocks Road, earlier, many years ago.
Thank you for that. It is related to this, but not to your exact examples. But I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on Queen Street in Richmond, because of course they've got the wide footpaths, the 30k zone, where it is a shared cycle/car space with neither of them having, priority over the other. So I just wondered if you had comments on that.
Sure. the good thing they've got there is the drainage is in the middle, so that it's not like they've got curbs. But what they've done exactly wrong is that there's a clear distinction between the footpath and the paving where the cars go, and so it just looks like a normal road. What you've got to do is to have that vagueness that the cars don't know who's got right of way, the people don't know who's got right of way. That's why our raised pedestrian things here work so well, is that no one's quite sure who's got the right of way, so everyone's sort of looking out. You know, that's why pedestrian crossings are so dangerous, because people expect they've got right of way, they just walk and they get bowled, you know. It's the creating the feel so that it's like a pedestrian realm that the cars are driving through, really.
So how long does some of that behaviour take to bed in? Because I know that sort of some of the painting and demarcation on Queen Street came in after cars were reversing and doing U-turns on the footpath area and even drove into shop windows. So unfortunately, yeah.
They're a bit keen.
Yeah. I would have thought you'd see things before the shop, but anyway, some people clearly can't. How long does it sort of take to change some of these behaviours so that actually safety isn't, you know, is still of paramount importance?
Yeah. I think if the feel was right, that would have happened quicker, you know, but we haven't got enough trees there, there's not any bollards, you know, and it doesn't feel like a pedestrian realm that you're driving through. That's what it comes down to, I think. Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Peter, thanks for the presentation. I'm sorry I've missed your first few slides. Just quick procedural question. You said you were banned from the Regional Transport Committee, or what for? Is that one coming up, or?
No, I asked to speak about this particular item at a previous Regional Transport Committee meeting, and they said no. They said it was an infrastructure issue, which it is, but it's actually a transport issue, I think.
All right, okay. Well, maybe that's something that we can address with maybe a follow-on conversation about urban planning and what it looks like. I think that's relevant. My second questions just go to, and there's probably about three of them, just the land development manual obviously is a pretty critical document in terms of what we end up with. You're well familiar with the land development manual. Is that one of the issues, that actually that document doesn't support or address these issues, or does it? These outcomes, I should say. I
only just looked at the more recent land development manual, and it doesn't actually have, if I'm reading it right, there's some staff here that can help me with this, but the older one actually specified what a footpath actually looked like and everything, but it appears that the 2019 one doesn't actually do that. Is that right? Or not sure.
Okay, so there might be some real opportunities through that flexibility to have a look at that stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I'm sort of interested in. And then the final one is, if you flick through the images that you've got, apart from the Greyland one, and so you go back, these ones, there's one thing I really notice, particularly you've got one there, I think that's in Japan, and note those ones. There's something I really notice. And the thing that I notice is that these are areas where there are not driveways taking cars on site to park. These are areas where we have got intensification. And I think in this, there is a distinct crossover about mutual benefits from intensification and modal shift and creating good spaces that are made for people. So I'm just wondering, you might be able to give us some thinking about this as to whether actually this issue is as important in that intensification plan as it is when it comes to our infrastructure planning. That actually the housing form is actually one of the key elements that creates these opportunities.
Yep, I agree with that.
Okay, all right, so I'll just take that in mind as we go through the intensification plan. Thank you. I suspect in these pictures that sitting behind a lot of them will be what we used to call in Melbourne the old dunny cart lanes, and that's where the access is.
Thanks so much, Peter. Really appreciate your time, effort, and thanks for the questions. Okay, next item is previous minutes, pages 6 to 13 in the agenda. So page 6, any changes, amendments? Page 7. Page 8, we talked about the stewardship guidelines, landfill business unit business plans, annual plans, annual reports, infrastructure quarterly report. And then we went to public excluded. So someone to move that there are true and correct record, no amendments. Councillor O'Neill Stevens, seconded Councillor Sanson. Those in favour say aye. Against? Carried, thank you very much. Move on to the chairperson's report. I'll take it as read. I'll just make one mention of, in terms of the parking meters, that you will recall at the 12th of December meeting, the council did consider the parking and vehicle control bylaw changes to accommodate the new parking technology and the infrastructure capital reports, a capital project supplementary report additional funding, which sends under the Delegation Infrastructure Committee. Because of the time frames, the officers brought it to the council meeting so it could be dealt with before Christmas. So it just needs to be reported back to this Infrastructure Committee as part of this report. So the amendment's up there on the screen. So basically what happened, this was a matter that is normally dealt with by the Infrastructure Committee. Because of the timeline, we needed to let the contract before Christmas. It went up to the council meeting. Your members of the council, as well as infrastructure, it was passed, but it needs to come back to this committee because that's where the delegation lies. So it's confirmation of a resolution that we passed in the 12th of December council meeting.
This is purely for information.
Yeah.
I think there's no...
Oh, so we don't have to, no. Vice, we don't have to pass it, we just, it's for your information. Right. And there was another one for the approval of the funding. So I just have to report it, but I have to move it, so it's already been moved, it's just been reported back. My bad. Yep, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, just looking at the parking meters and thinking about the coronavirus and wondering if these meters are coming from China. Are they coming from China? Most things come from China. In fact, it raises a rather larger issue, which I tried to raise at the audit risk, but I wasn't able to be at, in that in our infrastructure in particular, whether many of our maintenance supplies come out of China and whether we might be needing to think about the risks surrounding some of our infrastructure if we can't get the parts that we need.
So through the chair, I don't know where these meters are coming from and whether they're from China or not. But to answer Councillor Noonan's question, the exact concern that Councillor Noonan has been raised at SLT, and we have undertaken to meet with our business unit managers and our contractors to look at the effect of what the potential coronavirus may have on the delivery of our core services. So we've been tasked by our SLT to go look at that individually as group managers. I can tell you that we've met with our three main contractors, specifically our roading contractor, Higgins, Nelmac for the Nelson Wastewater Treatment Plant, and then the water treatment plant up at Tendragee and our catchments. We have a plan in place in terms of what we need to do, for example, to bring in chemicals, to make sure that if our ports are going to be closed, that we've got an ample supply. So we have started a massive thinking in this. We have set up weekly meetings going forward, and the contractors are well aware. They're even talking about resource sharing, isolating people in houses that we can make crews available. So there's a lot of thinking in the space, but it's a good question, yes.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that the thinking and the risk assessments being done. Where will that be reported to so that we can keep abreast of it?
It's a good question. I think probably maybe through audit and risk, where that has been raised, and we will feed in our respective advice to that, I would imagine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your report on page 14, parking metres, you do mention there, and I'm pleased to see it, 3.5, coins will still be available to be used to pay for parking as well as other methods. Now, why I've mentioned this is there's an incredible amount, I won't overstate it, there's a lot of interest from the public about these new parking metres that are coming in June, and they are really interested in wanting information. Now, I've been asked this question often, will coins still be available? And you've got it in there, and I'm pleased about that. And you say other methods, so just to give this a bit of exposure, could I get you to tell us what those other methods are?
Well, I can defer to the officer, maybe.
So through the chair, I can get Margaret Parfitt to answer those questions. And I also just want to state we will be rolling out a detailed and comprehensive communication plan in anticipation of when these meters are going to be rolling out. So.
Right, well, can I add to that? Because my suggestion is that it goes out early.
Oh, yes, oh, absolutely. It's
Thank you.
One of my top 5.
And through the chair, I can confirm that the frequently asked questions have been developed, and they will be available next week to go. So we're starting to, we know that there is interest. So the frequently asked questions will be going out through our news team, our communications team, as early as next week. And then there's a very comprehensive plan. We're going to have a dummy meter downstairs. We might take it out to the libraries. We'll have it at the market. So it's all coming, but we're starting with the frequently asked questions next week. And the other pay waves are the other way of paying, other than coins, is using cards that have a pay wave capacity. So there's not a slot to put your card into. We know from experience that they are problematic. So if you have a credit card or a debit card that is loaded with a pay wave capability, that will be able to be used. And we are also introducing a parking app. So there will be the ability to have an app on your phone. You put a stored value on your phone on that app, and you use that to pay for your parking. All of this is very clearly outlined in the frequently asked questions.
Councillor Edgar.
Thank you. Just, sorry, through you to...
Not so fast.
Thank you, Mark. Just as part of that tour with the parking meter, have you thought to go to rest homes or Positive Ageing Expo and things like that?
Yes, it's all in the communications plan.
Excellent. And just even strategies or tips on the simple things like how to remember your licence plate number?
It's in the frequently asked questions. We're suggesting people take a photograph on their phone, and we will be producing a credit card size piece of card, which in the first 2 weeks of rollout we leave under people's windscreen wiper for them to write their registration number down and pop into their wallet. So that when they get to their meter and they can't remember their registration, they pull it out and there it is.
Excellent. Yeah, it's just good not to rely solely on technology. I know enough older people who wouldn't be taking a photo of anything.
I find it incredible people don't remember the registration number of their car. But strange but true. Any other questions?
I do. I've got another follow-up. It's the free parking that they're also concerned about.
Yes, so the 1 hour free parking will remain with the new meters, and there is the ability to request your 1 hour free in 15-minute lots. So if you're coming into town in the morning, for example, and you know you're only going to be there for 30 minutes, you request your 30 minutes free parking in the morning. If you come back in the afternoon, the system will recognise that you still have 33 minutes remaining. But it's about selecting the time period that you require free when you first put your number plate in. It's a very clever system.
And coming to a city near you. Right, no other questions. I'll move that my chairperson's report review received. I'll move. Someone to second. Councillor Laurie. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Next, we've got the waste disposal landfill levy submission to the Ministry for the Environment. Mr. Dwyer. And Mrs. Parfitt. Report, I'll take it that the report has been read, but are there any matters that you wish to highlight or add that we should draw our attention to?
No, I think we'll just take questions.
Yeah, just by the way, I think this was something that was dealt with over the Christmas and New Year period. We got a I'd have to say, a plethora of submissions to be made over the holiday period, so some of us did read that, and the staff did put in a submission, so this is basically a retrospective approval that something was dealt with over the Christmas, New Year period, holiday period. But any questions? Moved by Councillor, before it's done, Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. No, I think it's in depth, and I enjoyed actually reading the letter to the Ministry of Environment there. So referring to that product stewardship, what do you mean by product stewardship? I think I know, but may not have it completely.
So you may recall at the last Infrastructure Committee meeting, we brought a report, which was another retrospective approval of a submission we made on product stewardship. It's about circular economy and suppliers of things such as tyres taking some responsibility for responsible disposal of those.
So that's about... Well, it's sort of directing it back towards the government to be able to maintain the momentum of product stewardship. It's about talking to the creator of those products who are maybe manufacturing or creating or using a particular product that's a stewardship. That if that particular product or mineral is being used, it's got to fit in the economy of recycling or non-recycling. Is that...
Would it be helpful if we gave you an example of product stewardship? So you, yep.
Yeah, so for example, the way it works in Australia is Coca-Cola run the product stewardship on behalf of the government. So when you buy a bottle of Coke, you pay an extra 10, 15 cents. When someone collects that at a recycle centre, they get like 5 cents. When it's processed into another bottle, they get 10 cents. Goes round and round. So basically it's creating a fund to create the circular economy.
Something like New Zealand used to do with aluminium and glass.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm looking at page 18, 5.2, and Mark, Officer Parford, first bullet point there, you talk about, the council supports, this is the officer's report, supports the proposed 2023 increase in the levy of $50 per tonne. It's $10 now. Has any thought, or would we, in discussions, would you be thinking about phasing that in? It seems a big increase to jump in 2023 from $10 to $50.
Through the chair, when they put forward the proposal, they really only gave a few options, and that's on the low end. So basically, they asked, do you want a 50 or a 60 or a greater increase, and do you believe it should be phased in or lumped in and then graduated slowly? So we've gone for a very middle of the road option.
Thank you, Mr Chair. So that means that there was an option to actually phase what I'm thinking of right now, more or less next year or something like that. Was there not that option? I would think there was more of an urgency about it, that's all. I think 2023, and when I saw this, I thought, well, where's the phase in here? Why can't we start phasing it in next year, $20 and $30?
Sorry, through the chair. This was seen as a significant number of changes to be happening in a very short time frame, and I think they saw that as the shortest possible time frame that you could do it. Mainly because a lot of the proposal is actually about data gathering, and the biggest part is expanding the levy to clean fills and that kind of thing. So there's an awful lot of work to be done there, so I think that's why they set the timetable.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I won't be supporting this increased levy, and it's not probably for reasons some may think. I totally support us reducing, as I've said before, as consumerism. I don't feel that increasing the landfill to enable more recycling saves our planet at all. I think it has the opposite effect. In fact, with sort of consumerism, as I've seen, just keeps increasing, and by us justifying that by trying to make more streams of recycling just sorts of feeds that hunger. And as is pointed out, some of these methods of measuring, reducing the landfill is not really a measure of us reducing our impact on whether it be the climate or the planet. As I've said before, I think we need to be reducing the amount of non-renewable resources, not increasing it. So it's it worries me. We've some great recycling initiatives which have worked extremely well, but they've worked so well that we tend to put more and more in a recycling bin, and as you've seen, when we've had to be realistic and cut what we recycle because they cannot be reused effectively, people get upset. And the idea sounds great, I believe, of trying to find more ways of recycling or circular economy, and the things like aluminium and glass are great. But a lot of these things, we're just pushing stuff under the rug, I see. So I don't believe this reduces our impact on the planet. I think it actually has the opposite effect. And as we've seen before, you can only recycle so far, and just the means of recycling is just keeps getting it out there in the environment rather than not using it. So I'd like to see more energies and times put on reducing our consumerism, reducing the use of non-renewable materials, not trying to find different ways to sort of reuse them, which is just impacting the planet even further. And it's about taking the resources out of the ground, out of the hole. It's not how much you're putting into the hole. So no, I won't be supporting this. I think there's better ways of us improving the environment around us than just moving tyres around up and down the country, trying to find a place to melt down or reuse a rubber tyre. By moving it around, we're just using more and more carbon in that sense. But no.
Speakers for or against? Councillor Fulton.
I'm going to speak in favour. This is a submission which has already been submitted anyway, so I just want to say well done to Terry and well done to Brian. You probably spent some time working on this. I think it's a great submission. I note that you talk about the importance of product stewardship and encouraging waste diversion. So the intention of this is to encourage waste diversion. It's not necessarily about recycling plastics. It's about reducing the amount of waste waste minimisation, reducing the amount of waste we produce. So it's definitely about decreasing consumerism. It's about looking at how we buy second-hand clothes, how we buy less stuff, how we consider that everything we buy should not be ending up in landfill immediately, and how long things will last. So I think that this is a really great direction of the government. The fact that the levy then goes towards other recycling and hopefully composting and green waste processing facilities is a key part of it, because that's one of the ways we can remove a significant amount of waste from landfill. And I think we need to be looking at a two-pronged approach, whereby we're decreasing the amount of waste through this levy, plus what we do with things so that they last longer and are utilised in different ways. So particularly green waste and composting. I look forward to that progressing, but well done on the submission. Thank you.
Yes, I'll also be speaking for, and I want to echo some of Councillor Fulton's points, and actually some of Councillor Skinner's points, is this isn't a question of one or the other. It's pointless to just have an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but you still need an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, just in case. And so when we're reducing our waste, yes, it's really important to not just be focusing on the inside of that and be reducing it at production. The fact is, at the moment, we're not doing a great job at reducing it at production, and this is a step that we can do to ultimately reduce our overall waste. And as Councillor Courtney said earlier, there is a sense of urgency to all of this, and I think the more things we can be doing to fight for that reduction is really great. And as Councillor Fulton said, it's a wonderful direction from the government, and I think we've created a huge, fantastic submission here, and a great thanks to staff for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It'll probably come as no surprise for you to hear that I'm supporting it as well. Product stewardship is really a massive part of the answer to the problems that we face, and using less and buying less and throwing less out is also part of that. But actually getting the people who make the waste to take responsibility for it is a massive part of the answer. And I'm just so thrilled that we've got a government that's finally taking that seriously. And one example that I always think of is tyres. Tyres are an absolute scourge, you know, when it comes to what we do with them after they've been used. And while I sympathise with some of Councillor Skinner's statements, we're going to have to deal with tyres for quite a long time. And the fact that we've got a government now that is actually looking at product stewardship for tyres is the right way for this country to be going. So if we can support them in that direction, that's the right thing to do, which is why I'm supporting this.
Councillor Edgar?
Don't have anything new to add, I just support the previous.
Right, and Councillor Sampson?
I'm speaking in support of this, and I just want to raise another aspect of landfill, which I think is often forgotten, is that aside from the waste going to landfill, that waste is also generating a significant amount of carbon, and we, as ratepayers in a community, are also responsible for, through the emissions trading scheme, we are required to offset our emissions. So just referring to the last Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit, 22nd of June 2018, we have about 55,000 tonnes of carbon emissions, and at the current rate of $27 a unit for the NZU carbon credit, that's about $1.5 million a year. That the NZU is predicted to go to $35 a unit next year, and so we need to be doing everything we can as a community to reduce our waste to landfill so that we are not going to face a really crippling level of carbon emissions that we're already required to offset. So I support the submission.
There'll be no other discussion or debate. I'm ready to put the motion. Those in favour, it's been moved by Councillor Edgar, seconded by Councillor Rainey. Those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
Motion is carried. Next one is the item 8, residents only car park. And invite the officer, I think is Mrs. Parfitt. Pretty self-explanatory report. I'll take it as read. Is there anything you wish to add or highlight or any corrections?
No, Mr Chairman, I don't think I need to, except just to remind you that the request came from councillors at a hearing panel that we look at this issue of residents' car parks, and that's why the report is here today. And the work that we've done to look at the cost for fees for residents' car park is what's resulted in what you see in front of you, which is two decisions, is do the fees need to change, and if so, when? So there are two decisions within this report. Firstly, through you, Mr Chair, I just want to thank Ms Parfitt for producing this report. I was on that hearings panel. It is a really good report and covers the issue well. Just wondered if there was a thought to CPI adjust at the very least. It's sort of something that I think is important to do with fees. There was a comment in here that it hasn't been adjusted at all for a number of years, and at the very least we should be CPI adjusting our fees, even if we do then follow the recommendations to, you know, basically make this part of the overall strategy. So through the chair, I think there could be some merit in a CPI adjustment to the installation fee. A CPI adjustment on a $20 a year rental is quite insignificant.
Through the chair, also, I also just remind the committee that we're bringing a separate report to this committee to deal with fees and charges for general infrastructure, of which we could address applying the CPI to this in the interim. We could do that.
Yeah, but really, the point, it's a minuscule amount. Yeah. Councillor Brand, then Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, through the chair. I was just looking at how the fees have jumped. It says on page 37, it goes from 0 to 50, 350 to 1,000, 20 to 500. These are significant jumps, and I appreciate that no increase has been looked at over that period, and all that is explained about how these figures have been arrived at is to recover cost, but there's no breakdown of how those figures have actually been calculated.
Certainly, through the chair, the figure from 350 to 1,000, it's simply based on our road maintenance contractors' rates for line marking, installing a sign. We have never attempted to recover reinstatement, so if somebody moves away and we need to take the resident's car park out because it's no longer required, we then have to send the contractor back to reline mark, remove signs, change signs, so it's effectively a doubling because we're recognising that there are two parts of this work, and those prices are based on contractors' rates for the work that is required to install a car park. The initial application fee going from $0 to $50 is simply a recognition of the staff time that goes into preparing the reports that come to the hearings panel. There does need to be some investigation done on that, and it's work that is carried out with no recovery at the moment. And then the annual renewal fee, I think, is covered through the advice that is provided in the report about what valuation has been given. I will point out that our residents' car parks in Nelson they operate quite differently from any others that I've looked at around the country. They provide you with an exclusive 24/7-hour car park outside your house, and the fees that are on page 37 apply to if that was to remain the way we operate them. Other places around the country's fees, as you can see also in the report, are not as expensive because the scheme operates differently. I anticipate that this is a large area of work that needs looking at, perhaps as part of the proposed parking strategy.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions, if that's okay. I'll just monitor me if you like. The first question is that at 3.3, as another councillor has raised, the fees have not been reviewed in a number of years, and I wonder why they're not on a normal process of being reviewed. Why is that?
Through the chair, that is a very good question, and I have to be upfront here and I say I think it's been an oversight. So they have fallen, in the past, residents' car parks were approved through the Environment Committee or the Regulatory Committee or the panel, which sits away from the Infrastructure Committee. So when we do fees and charges renewals every year, we've looked at historical reports that have said, corridor access request fee, road closure fee, and this one, because it sat outside of the normal infrastructure process, has been overlooked historically. So it's only in recent times that we've sort of thought this is an infrastructure thing, it should be coming to an infrastructure committee, which is why you have the report in front of you today.
Right, so will that now be?
I think it will now, as Mr. Laverdis alluded to earlier, if we were to change it, it would be within the annual fees and charges review.
Yep, that's great.
We're fair to say that, just chip in here, is that I've sat on dozens of hearing panels over the last few years, and these came up very rarely. But you have to say, in the last few months, there has been a real proliferation, which has alerted I and other members of the panels there's something going on here that does need a look. So that's why this report has come back here.
Yes, and I think there's a reason.
It was a relatively rare. They were relatively rare.
I think there's a reason for that, which I will use and debate, but I will keep that for then. The second question I have is regarding you're wanting us to approve a moratorium on any new ones in the meantime. That seems like a pretty firm, that means nothing. So what I'm wondering, is there another mechanism if someone needs an urgent one for any reason, and I can't think of any reason, but these things do occur. Is there a better mechanism if someone needs one urgently?
Through the chair, I think that's a decision of the committee. I mean, you may choose to put in your recommendation that somebody such as the group manager infrastructure or the chief executive has a delegated authority to approve those very exceptional cases. It's not in the recommendation at the moment, but I think that would be the mechanism for it.
I think it may be easier than having a whole item on a meeting. Could someone give some thought as to, I suppose you want me to draft something?
I have to say that I did send out an email to all members of the council. If you're thinking about putting up amendments, would it be useful to do something?
And I didn't until now, Mr Chair, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether there was a possibility of doing the change, so what would you like me to do?
If you're considering putting an amendment up, could you prepare one, find someone to second it, and we'll debate it.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, the last question I have on this item is, I know there are a number of areas around the city where there are limited time parking, and the one that I'm referring to is probably opposite where I live, which is a time limited. There are 2 or 3 car parks, I think, which basically they don't belong to anyone, but they're a limited time park because of the congestion in the area for parking. Are there any others in the city, and is that potentially something that could be an alternative? So it's not aligned to a particular property.
So through the chair, yes, there are other time-limited parking areas on the city fringe, quite a few around the NMIT, for example. And the way that other resident car park schemes operate in other cities is that the permit allows the residents in that street to stay longer than the time period. And that is exactly the sort of thing we want to explore when we look at a parking strategy.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you.
All right. Mr Chair, through to Officer Parfitt. In this parking strategy review, we're not moving the fees up at this point, but will this item be considered? Because it doesn't sit easy with me that we're not recovering our expenses here, not recovering council's expenses in operating this resident-only car parking permit fees. And that puts the burden on the ratepayers across the board, residents and ratepayers across the board. So to me, that doesn't seem fair. So with the parking strategy review, will this be looked at closely to have a way of working towards at least recovering our costs?
So through the chair, I think the parking strategy review will outline what the scheme looks like. The fees and charges would be subject to committee approval. The strategy will come to full council, but the issue of equity or would be part of the thinking that goes into writing what the scheme looks like in the future, which is part of the parking strategy review. And then the issue of cost recovery would be in the fee setting sort of scene to come for subsequent approval. You are correct, we're not fully recovering our fees, our costs at the moment. But we would look to address that.
Oh, you will look to address it?
We would look to address it as we look at how the scheme operates and then subsequently what the fees are.
Fine, because you do see there's just not fairness there, is there?
Thank you. Look, I think this is a really important piece of work to consider, especially if we're looking at intensification into the future, and also looking at how, if we're looking at modal shift within our CBD, what that spillover effect might be into residential areas. So I imagine that this demand for private parking on street could increase. Having been in Wellington a few times where my son lives and he doesn't have a park where he lives, and then half of the street is residential and half of it is available for commuters, I can see that it's different models in different cities to Nelson. Do they have an application fee though? Because I can't see the application fees for Wellington or Dunedin or Christchurch. Do they just charge an annual fee because they already have them demarked?
Through the chair, I'm sorry, it's a number of weeks since I wrote this report and I can't recall what I saw about an application fee. I'll have to come back to you on that.
Yeah, okay. I guess I'm just thinking into the future, if we ended up with systems more like other cities, I know they paid a quarterly amount because people who are renting might move quite rapidly, so it seems reasonable to me that the prices you're proposing seem reasonable in terms of that exclusivity of 24/7, 52 weeks of the year, that some people who are renting might need short-term options, and if we change to a system more like other cities, we might be looking at 4 or 5 permanent residential parks or something within a street. So I'm sure you'll turn your mind to that as part of the review.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just through you, just thinking about the growing population, intensification of our urban areas, is it reasonable, well, how realistic is it to think that what we have now will be the system we have going forward, where people have that exclusive use of public space, which is what they get under our present policy? And as you pointed out through the chair, Ms. Parfitt, that's unique to Nelson. And I just think, it doesn't strike me as very realistic, and I'm thinking we're going to have to spend a fair bit of energy on communicating the reasons why it might not be realistic.
Through the chair, I think there will always be the need for some way of catering for people, and I think about the South Street precinct. You know, there are places where those residents have no car parks, and so I think there is always going to be a need for some way of catering for those people, whether it's the way we do it now, which is an exclusive 24/7 52-week car park, or whether it's closer to what Wellington and other cities provide, which is an area for that entire street on a first-come, first-served basis, is a question for the parking strategy to look at. So there's always going to be a need, but how we do it is something that we need to work through as part of our larger thinking around what parking looks like. And the parking strategy is a big piece of work. This is a subset within it.
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you for that. So, I thank you for the report, and I'm sort of considering the options there, and some stand out for me. So if we were to make adjustment in fees, but not defer these, but go for the next option, one of approved consultation, etc., etc., is that going to put great difficulty? I know you in 7.1 you talk about defer until we've had a chance to do a modal shift strategy, but how difficult is it really if we made a fee change and then went to a consultation for proposed fees, etc., going from that, and depending on we might as a council make a certain decision on our modal shift or parking strategy, but can that not just then be implemented as well after that? There's always going to be a lag between when you next look at the fees, and obviously we might try and time that for the next round of annual fees, etc.
So through the chair, yes, so I will point out the modal shift strategy is sort of an interchangeable term with parking strategy. I've been talking about a parking strategy. There would be a need to engage closely with the 31 existing permit holders. That will take time.
Yep.
And then when we do the modal shift / parking strategy, we would be engaging again. And I think our recommendation to not do that is based on the fact that it's almost sending a mixed message. We're saying, well, we're going to continue with this, but we want to know what your thoughts are on doubling the fees, and then 12 months later, we might be changing the scheme altogether. So there's 2 lots of consultation, and I will say consultation and engagement requires a lot of work. All we would gain from 31 car parks if we were to put the fees up in that interim time is about $1,500. So, no, actually, I had another figure. It's more than that, $15,000, which in the big scheme of things is barely going to cover the staff time that it takes you to do the engagement. So the recommendation was, let's do it once and let's do it right.
So in the interest of sort of advancing and getting to a decision on this particular issue is that Councillor Noonan has put up an addition to the recommendation, because the recommendation hasn't been moved or seconded, so this will become the substantive recommendation or substantive motion.
We want to change a word.
Change a word?
We'd like to change the word to approves a stop on issuing any new resident rather than using the word moratorium. So maybe the staff would like to make a comment on that.
Right. Maybe, it's probably putting you on the spot, Mrs. Parfitt. Do you have a view on the word moratorium or stop? I think they mean the same thing. A moratorium.
I was going to ask somebody if they had a thesaurus with them, but...
Temporary prohibition of an activity.
There's a temporary, so what we're saying is that we're deferring decision. Look, we may, at the end of the parking strategy, go back to this, but what we're saying is that for the time being, let's just do a pause, and a moratorium, I think, is a better...
Okay, the Mayor's talking to me because she's seconding, so we're suggesting a halt.
Yes. Maybe just second it with that word. The reason I just moratorium is absolute, and so it's a little bit tricky to say you're doing a moratorium and then you're allowing for exemptions, and I think the halt is right. We're putting a halt. Won't be happening, but in exceptional circumstances for essential need, and I do think that is important, that there may be a circumstance here where due to health reasons or other issues like that, and accessibility issues, somebody may need one of these.
So move.
Second.
Rightio, so, well, this is what you're moving, Councillor Noonan? Do you have a seconder?
Yes.
So it's been moved, Councillor Noonan, seconded by Her Worship the Mayor. Question from Councillor Laurie and Councillor Rainey.
So my question to staff through the chair is, I understand it's obvious why someone might want to put this up, but I'm just wondering about the potential for it to open a can of worms, and I'm wondering about whether if we pass this, we'll have a number of people putting their hands up for these areas, and that could make things more difficult when we do a more comprehensive review.
Through the chair, so that the criteria would remain the same. They have to have be outside of the CBD, have no off-street parking or potential to put off-street parking in. But one of the cases we've had recently was somebody who had bought a house, they met all that criteria, and they had a significant health issue that meant they couldn't walk 400 metres if they needed to on any given day. So that's exactly the sort of situation we are describing here. It is an exceptional case that we would take that to the Group Manager Infrastructure for consideration. We would still be, unless they had that in their request, it would be, no, we have halted issuing these pending the review of the parking strategy. So it would need a very strong case for us to escalate it up.
Well, I had some fears that this is a bit pointless, because surely every case for having off-street parking in the eyes of the person who's making the application is going to have merit. I'm presuming this is just going to mean that every single case for off-road parking is going to come to the GM infrastructure.
So through the chair, as Margaret indicated, the current policy would not be catered for in what we've put there. So that's why I've put in based on for special circumstances based on essential need. So that gives us an additional criteria to consider where somebody, for example, literally cannot walk 20 metres and they need that. Otherwise, that'll be my yardstick. Because if I don't have that, then I'd be hard pressed to turn anybody away.
We can further the question. I understand that, but surely that's not going to stop everybody trying. And that's my concern, is there's a distinct difference between a moratorium until such time as we've considered this as part of a policy review or parking review, and saying, oh, now it's going to be on a one-by-one case basis. Surely you're still going to be getting people coming to you, and then you make a decision whether it's warranted or not.
So, absolutely.
So there's a distinct difference between a moratorium where there's no possibility of making an application until such time as the parking review strategy is reviewed. I think this is just, to be perfectly blunt, bureaucracy going a little bit silly.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to speak in support of what is there. The word moratorium is essentially a prohibition, temporary prohibition, and there was a disconnect. You can't prohibit something and then have exceptions to it. I mean, that's an inconsistent resolution, and it's very, very clear what is intended here. But moratoriums have caused us problems in the past because there will be, not everyone is the same, and exceptional circumstances do happen. And I would like to make sure that the officers aren't put in a position where they're unable to be compassionate. They want to be compassionate. If a circumstances arose, I want us to be a compassionate council, and that's all this is attempting to do. It's not going to cause a sudden rush on them, because there hasn't been a sudden rush on them, except recently we've had some coming through, and it's very clear it's a halt. But I can think of circumstances, and Margaret's just described one, where you would want our officers to be able to be compassionate. It allows them to do that.
Right, we're done with questions because we can move into debate. You've got a question, or is it an item of debate?
No, I can do both, but I'll do it after.
No, it's the question.
It is a question. You asked the questions, Mr. Chair, asked the questions, I put my hand up, and I thought you noted that. I'm not here to debate whether. Thank you. Sorry, but the question was here, I'm trying to work out when we make a vote on this, there's two things here. One, if this is lost in the vote, what happens then? I believe we've got nothing happening, is that right? Two, we've got two decisions here pretty much, and we're trying to meld them together so they work cohesively. We've got a desire maybe from many to increase the fees for good reason, and we've got a desire to sort of hold off from doing that till we've got our strategy together. Can we not make those decisions separately? As we've got decision 1 and decision 2. Decision 1 is about making adjustment fees or not, and decision 2 is making a moratorium on this. We've sort of combined them together, and for me, if I or others don't support that, we get nothing does done, but there's a sort of bit of a compromise there in my thinking of what I'd like to achieve.
That was a question.
Yeah, it's a question. Right. We can deal, well, what we'll do is let's receive the report, so we've got know what we're talking about. So we'll deal with that one first. So we'll receive the report, and we can actually split it up and deal with each of those resolutions separately. If that's what you're proposing?
I'd like to. I'm just concerned that if we do it separately, we will still get a good result, and I can see why we've put it into one whole thing, but with this changes. But is there something I've overlooked that staff, or you, Mr. Chair, may think it's not a good idea to break that up? I think it's a good idea, but I'm...
No, well, in light of what you've raised, I will put them separately.
Thank you. Thank you.
The first one we'll do is we'll receive the report, the residents-only car park permit fee. So someone to move Councillor Laurie, seconded. Councillor Sanson, those in favour of receiving the report will say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Right, we've got something to talk about. Questions, we've got Councillor Edgar, then Councillor Laurie. Question? Debate. Debate? Okay, we're done. The only question that I've got really, Mrs. Parfitt, is that in item 3, this will still have to come to a hearings panel other to be approved? Because normally what happens is that the report comes from the officers, so what does the paragraph, number 3 is talking about is that's an additional step that goes through before it is presented to a hearings panel. So this is not in lieu of a hearings panel, this is an additional step before the hearings panel.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you're correct.
Great, thank you.
councillor, thank you. Same mover and seconder? We have. Okay, good, thank you.
We're dealing with these ones, but some may approve.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I'm happy to speak in favour of number 2. While I was on that hearings panel and, was one of the requesters of this report, I think the issues highlighted earlier by Mrs. Parfitt were key, and we know that we've also got a lot of consultations coming out this year. We've got Nelson Plan, we've got Annual Plan, we're going to have the Transport Strategy. There's going to be another long list. We need to be careful and quite mindful about our consultations, and to have a consultation on a process that may in 1 year, or undoubtedly in 1 year, will change everything. There's a cost to this. There's a staff time cost. I would rather the staff time was put into the parking strategy and all the AMP reviews and all of the other transportation work that we've got on a long priority list for them. This is not on a list for them, and so something else will slip. And I don't have anything else in the transportation area that I think should slip down, and that this would become a higher priority. And yeah, the cost to do it as well, and just the waste of the public's time. We need to respect the public's time around consultation, engagement with them, and do it properly. So, yeah, I am definitely in favour of this.
Thank you. Yeah, for number 2, I support the officer's recommendation of an adjustment of fees. So I support the adjustment of fees rather than deferring it. They're, as you can see, when on the hearing panel, as some of you are aware, we constantly get requirements, and not always very valid requirements, for parking on the roadside, and when it's really a public space, and it creates further parking issues. And we've got to remember that those parking spots on the roadside are a public amenity, a public space, and I feel that the fees that current don't reflect the real hireage or leasage of those spaces. So number 2, if it's deferring, I can't support deferring. I'd say agreeing to yes, make an adjustment in fees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to read the first sentence of the discussion to lead off my debate. Intensification is increasing demand for on-street parking across the city. This is going to cause an ongoing problem that we want to intensify, but it's got a problem with it. So we need to work out how we're going to deal with the problem. So if people are having trouble parking because maybe commuters are coming into town and it's spreading, they're not using car parks, interesting. So they're spreading further out and they're going into residential areas, and now it's creating a problem because people can't even get people to come and visit them because commuters are parking outside their houses every day. So then they go, oh, okay, well, let's apply to the council because I need a car park so that I can have people come and see me or service my apartment or whatever. So we need to actually have a little bit further thinking about why we're having the problem and people actually using this mechanism. So this mechanism needs to be looked at quite carefully because we're going to have to do something else. Now, parking sharing can work. We've seen that in other places, which is one of the questions I asked. There are several areas around the city with limited parking, people share. I'm not sure whether an actual allocated residential park is essential. You may be able to replace it with shared parking, less of. But I think overall, the modal transport is probably our number 1 issue leading up to this resident parking issue. So I'm supporting deferring because I'm looking at these fees and I'm thinking the example that we had was for the need for someone who can't walk very far at all because they're unwell and they're so ill that they need to actually have easy access to their car. And it's not something that happens all the time, but some people are going to have that issue. Some people are crippled. And sometimes, they might have arthritis and they're never going to get better In other cases, some people might have a temporary illness. They might be recovering from some surgery or whatever. I think we need to be able to respond to that on a temporary basis, which is why I want that other piece put in. But when we're looking at an annual fee possibility of going from $20 to $500, and when we're using the example of the person who's really ill, I actually worry about that. So when it comes to setting the fees, I think we need to be sensible about what it is and what the purpose of that application is. So I am in favour of waiting on the fees, and I guess we can debate number 3 at the same time. You're going to put them separately, but I imagine you want us to debate them at the time together. Thank you. So yes, the reason for putting that extra piece on there is for that person who it may not even happen, but if they are in need, then I think that we need to be able to respond to that. And maybe it's just a limited time, and I assume that the officers can say, look, yes, you can have 12 months, and then, you know, that's it, and we can review it. And if the situation's changed, then it reverts to a car park that everyone can use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll support both 2 and 3. They strike me both as sensible ways forward. I do think that all of this is a preview of coming attractions, a precursor to a bigger debate that we're going to be having, which is really important because it will largely shape what sort of city we have in the future. And at the heart of the issue is a simple question, and that question is, do people have the right to occupy the public space for free or for next to free? Do they have the right to privately occupy the public space for free or for next to free? And as councillors, we have to figure out what the answer is to that question, because it will largely affect and impact on how the city is shaped in the years to come. And I think everyone agrees that we need to be able to provide parking for people who absolutely need it. But we also have to think about where we're going as a city, and I think the way we have done things for the best part of a century is not going to be the way forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Noonan for raising this very important issue of accessibility and ensuring that when we're legislating, we're doing so in a way that is compassionate and leaving room for that. Excuse me. I think what's really important in the fees discussion is that in the parking strategy, we're going to be, or we can be looking at who's able to access this policy. And I think that that's really important in how we're charging. If we're charging exorbitant or difficult amounts for those who are in desperate need of this parking for accessibility issues, then I think that's another question. But charging higher fees for someone who would just like the convenience of being able to park outside of their home is a very different question. And perhaps it's a question of whether or not we break up those categories for the sense of charging. I think at the heart of this is also that sense of, as Councillor Laurie touched on, he said rights, I'd say entitlement, whether we're entitled to park outside our homes, and increasingly as as Councillor Noonan touched on, the scope of our city that is impacted by the city centre and by our CBD increases, that question of who's entitled to park where also increases and impacts more people. And I personally believe that if you have the ability to walk 500 metres to your car, then that's probably where you're entitled to park, especially if it's coming at the cost of people who don't have that accessibility.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to support the recommendation. I think as part of this review, we probably should be reviewing our mobility parking permits and what the criteria are to fit that, and whether we should be looking at being able to very easily apply for a short-term mobility parking permit for people who have just had surgery or have injured their back and have a what could potentially be seen as a minor mobility issue for a short term, but actually it really affects them, and that's important to address. Should we be looking at having accessibility, mobility parks on our streets rather than it being a permitted? So I think that what's come up through this conversation is that there's an issue around permits for people who are working and have busy lives. Maybe they've got family, and actually that convenience is really important to them because their lives have to work, versus mobility issues. And I think we probably need to be considering that in our residential streets as well, how we address that accessibility for people in need because of physical or emotional reasons. I imagine it applies to too. So I think that's part of that bigger picture. I think that that into the future we could imagine people are walking, cycling, taking the bus to work, but they still might need to be able to park a car on the street, which is there 24/7, and we need to support that for their, they might be sharing a car with families. So I think that what we want to support is a decrease in the use of cars for everyday use, but we also want to understand why people might need to still own a car for holidays or for family or other reasons, and how we support that in our city, in our streetscapes, as well as within people's housing areas. If we intensify, it might be better to support people being able to park on the street, in my mind.
All right, thanks so much. Finished with the debate. Okay, I'll put the motion. The first one we'll deal with is number 2, starting with defers any decision adjusting fees until we've completed the parking strategy review. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. We'll deal with number 3, approves a halt on issuing any resident-only car parks until a parking review, allowing for exemptions approved by GM Infrastructure, Chair of the Infrastructure Committee, on a case-by-case, special circumstances and based on essential needs. That's the motion. I'll put it. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. We'll take a short break, maybe 5 minutes. Come back at 11:30. Okay, councillors, we'll come back to order. We're a little bit behind schedule, so we need to keep moving. You'd like to take your spots? I'm looking at you. Rightio. Next item on the agenda is the infrastructure quarterly report to 31 December. Now, this is quite a long report. I'll take it as read. I'm certainly not wanting to go through each line item and discuss ad nauseum, but invite the officers to come forward. We've got Ms Plum, Mr Light, Ms Parfitt, Mrs Parfitt. I am assuming the report has been read, so the office, I haven't had any questions from anybody, so I'm assuming that there are no questions, but I know that it will be a forlorn hope. But are there any matters you wish to update the committee on the quarter report in the areas that you're working on?
Thank you. Through the Chair, just a reminder that our report is to the quarter end of December, but we have, to the best of our ability, actually updated it to the end of January, so for completeness. And what I'd really like to highlight is that we're really pleased that we confirm that we've got some great construction underway. We've got Te Hunanui Pathways, Stage 2, that's the section along Muritai, etc. Innisbrook Drive Water Main, along by the Black Cats underway. St Vincent Street Sewer, and yes, I know it's causing some traffic issues, but it's up and underway, which is fantastic. Saxton Stage 3, which includes the new bridge access across Ngāti Rārua, is also underway. On a really, really positive note, Gracefield Diversion project is progressing ahead of schedule, and we're now projecting that construction will be completed in 2020 rather than 2022. We do have some underspends this year that we are forecasting, and we've been forecasting them for a little bit, but just wanted to make you aware that these are associated with the projects around Orphanage Stream Bunding and land acquisition associated with that, Seafield Terrace, Wakatu Drive Stormwater and Awatea Pump Station. We are forecasting an underspend of approximately $2 million, but we're tracking against our forecast and we are holding that forecast at this time. There is unfortunately one performance measure that we haven't met this quarter, and that's the patronage on the public transport has dropped slightly on all but one. Right, it hasn't now?
Well, it hasn't dropped, it just hasn't grown as much as we'd like it to.
There we go. And just finally, a really quick reminder on our one-page reports that the health of the project, where you see your red, green and orange, is tracking against the original LT budget and timing. Therefore, although the project's received approvals around budget and timing and has been actually re-baselined from a project delivery perspective, the health refers back to that original initial baseline. Thank you.
Thank you, through the Chair. So my question relates to page 94, the targets. So looking at the first line there, we've got the targets, a safer road network, and then year 2, fewer fatalities, and then the quarterly reporting. It's my understanding that in December 2019, Central Government have issued a report on the road to zero. So I'm meaning the goal is 0 fatalities on the roads. Is that's the goal of that policy? So I'm wondering, at some point, are we going to be updating our targets? So rather than fewer fatalities on the previous year, our goal might be 0 fatalities for our road networks. And then in relation to that, is there a mechanism for us to be, I know that we have a really comprehensive programme of works. I am aware of a number of areas around our city where there is significant concern from community members around safety, in particular for school kids getting to and from schools. And I just want to know if there is some way that smaller projects which address safety of kids in our community can be prioritised? Is there a mechanism for that?
Thank you. Through the chair, the question's in two parts, so I'll address the first one. The government, the New Zealand Transport Agency Safety Strategy Road to Zero has just been launched, and that is certainly something we will be talking to you about, because the place for us to change our target or our level of services in our activity management plan. And we would be wanting to write our regional and transport strategies and our activity management plans to give effect to the government policy statement and the direction. So yes, I do see that there will be a shift in that. Whether it's setting Vision Zero, as some city councils and regional councils have done, Hamilton have adopted Vision Zero, it's an aspirational target, and how you achieve it is going to be over a staged period of time. But that's something we will workshop with you when we bring you the Transport Activity Management Plan workshop. The second part of your question is about how to identify safety. Yes, there is a mechanism. We have a low-cost, low-risk budget, any project under $1 million, and that has a long list of projects. In the longer scheme of things, we will be bringing to you through the activity management plan a proposal that we have a safety zone of 500 metres around every school in Nelson. And when you put every school in Nelson on a map and you put 500 metre radius around them, it's the whole city. It's a big blob on a map. So we will be looking to do that. In the next year, we still have our low cost, and that's the 2021-25 period. In the next year, to address those immediate needs, we have the low-cost, low-risk budget. It is allocated. We can move money around within that. We can reprioritise. And we have, as a council, discretion to do that without a lot of... it's not a big project, so NZTA doesn't need a point of entry business case, or it's our decision. So we try to do that where we can. Yes.
Okay, thanks for that. I just want a follow-up comment, if I may, really briefly, is that I'm aware that you're also aware of issues around Franklin Street, and you know, there are some community members really concerned about that for little people. I think Councillor Edgar and I actually went and observed it, and I think for me, what came out from that was that it's not just one or two walking school buses that are impacted by that really busy intersection, but there was tons of high school students and intermediate school students kind of running the gauntlet across that intersection. And whilst your recommendation to the alternative route across Motueka Street and that kind of thing I thought was prudent from a safety perspective, there's a whole lot of other teenagers who are using that intersection in a way that I think is just an accident is inevitable, and I'm just feeling uncomfortable, aware of how dangerous that intersection is, and not doing anything. So I just wanted to put that on the table. Yeah, well, you don't have to, but
no. Well, I will, just for the benefit of the other councillors. So I have been in discussion with the schools and with the walking school bus driver, and suggested for that particular walking school bus there could be an alternate route as an immediate solution. And I'm not suggesting that this is the solution, but it's what we can do tomorrow. We could reroute the walking school bus across the other side of Waimea Road and through Nelson College, who have welcomed it and who have welcomed signage. We are working really hard. So part of the problem at Franklin Street is a consequence of the Hampden Street West closure. The intersection is busier and it is a complex intersection, and we are bringing back to this committee a report in May with all of our monitoring results around that trial. We will be working very hard with the New Zealand Transport Agency to look at how we can improve the safety of that intersection. Now, I can't preempt it, but one solution might be a set of traffic signals at Franklin Street. There might be other solutions, such as zebra crossings on Franklin Street, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that Waimea Road carries over 20,000 vehicles a day at the moment, and a zebra crossing on Lower Franklin Street could in fact worsen some safety effects. So we can't rush this decision. We have to do it in a considered way. We have to do perhaps some modelling to see what queue lengths would be. The immediate thing we can do is reroute the bus, the walking school bus chaos, which it's scary to watch what goes on there. It's always been a busy intersection. Nelson College boys historically have run the gauntlet there. That's why we put a refuge on Waimea Road to get them to their driveway. It is an area that has history. It's under a little bit more pressure because of the Hampden Street closure, and we will be bringing a report back there. But we can't rush this.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, just picking up on that last topic, if it's okay. Ms. Parfitt, you said that if we were to add a crossing to Franklin Street, that could, quote, worsen some safety effects, which I think is a good point to make, because we're thinking about the safety of people trying to get across Franklin. They're just people in cars, not just people, they're people in cars, largely on Waimea Road. Can you tell me a bit more about what you mean by worsen some safety effects?
My choice of words was probably not ideal, through the chair. So what I'm saying is we need to understand, if you're going to put pedestrian and cycle priority crossing on up the Franklin Street in front of the Franklin Hall there, or near that intersection, what is the queuing effect on Waimea Road? If cars are turning into Franklin Street and suddenly have to stop because the pedestrians would have right of way on a zebra, what does that do to the risk of nose to tails or sudden queue forming on Waimea Road? We really need to model that, and we actually need to model that it doesn't bring Waimea Road to a standstill as well.
Okay, so thank you. Through the chair, my question relates to page 70 of the report, and it's about the Tahunanui Cycle Network project on State Highway 6. In the section of the report, of the page, project issues, one of them is ongoing public concern over the loss of parking along Muritai Street. I wonder if we could perhaps add to that box ongoing public concern over the difficulty Nelsonians face safely cycling along Muritai Street. Because I know that people are concerned about the safety of people travelling by bicycle and by foot in that part of town, particularly people trying to get to school. Is that a fair comment?
Through the chair, the project's about helping solve that. So I don't think from a project perspective that's what the issue is. The issue is that we are making it a lot easier. We'll be making it a lot easier for cyclists and walkers along that area. But the issue the project has is that we are still getting a bit of pushback around the fact that we're even doing it.
And just finally, I do love seeing a sentence on this page that says, this project is running ahead of program. In a nutshell, how is this possible?
Through the chair, when our ducks line up and our contractor is on site when they say they're going to be on site and they have a full crew and things move forward efficiently, we can sometimes get ahead of our program.
Love it, thank you.
We've got Councillor Courtney, Councillor Edgar and Councillor Noonan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through to Mark or Lois. I'm looking at page 49, 5.2, public transport income, and you mentioned there how it's 146,000 ahead of budget, and it goes on. Additional expenditure has had additional subsidy approval from the NZTA. However, delays in moving to a gross contract may, I emphasise the may, require an additional request to the NZTA to be made to assist in covering additional expenditure. And what was the length of that delay is one question, going to a contract, a gross contract. Another question would be, and is it too early or have you some idea of what you've been able to determine what the likely costs in that delay have been? And a third question, I might as well give them all to you. Is there any doubt that NZTA will give you the extra money and...
Okay, through the chair, the first question, the period of the delay. So why the delay? We are moving to a gross contract when we move to electronic ticketing. So that's governing how long this delay is going to be. And how long is a piece of string? So we will move to a gross contract when electronic ticketing comes in. The additional expenditure, it's really just it's a paper exercise. The budgets were set up to show that we were going to a gross contract earlier. The actual costs around moving to a gross contract cancel each other out in terms of income and expenditure. The request for additional funding from NZTA reflects some of those additional costs, such as the driver meal break changes. But there have also been some additional costs around their quarterly adjustments aren't keeping up. NZTA have indicated that they will entertain a cost scope adjustment to help us meet that. That was some time ago. The amount may have changed depending on what the operational costs are. We've had some curveballs like the driver meal breaks. I'm not nervous about it. NZTA are in the business of supporting public transport, so I'm not nervous about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So just if I can go back to Waimea Road, just a couple of points of clarification. So can you just clarify the degree to which the Waimea Road modelling you were talking about is contained within the Nelson Future Access Study, or is this a separate piece of work? And if so, where is it at?
Through the Chair, it's not part of the Nelson Future Access Study because at the moment we haven't asked them to model any change at that intersection. So it would be an additional piece of work at Waimea Road. So, well, there's been work at the moment. Sue, would you like to jump in at any stage? But there has been work done on Waimea Road in terms of forecasted growth. The intervention that is being requested at Franklin Street would need to be modelled in something called SIDRA, which looks at queue lengths. So do you want to embellish that?
The modelling that's been done for the Nelson Future Access Strategy is very strategic regional modelling. So it's looking at saying there's going to be an extra 4,000 vehicles on Waimea Road. What we're looking at is the actual detail of left turns and right turns against a number of pedestrians and timings and delays and levels of service. So they're done individually at a intersection level. And at this stage, the Nelson Future Access Strategy isn't doing it at that level. It is a piece of work that we're going to be doing later, but we're just looking at bringing it forward for this particular intersection.
So that intersection aside, because I mean it isn't the only problematic area on Waimea Road, as we're aware. The Market Road Bishopdale intersection and that area there is also very problematic. It has been, issues have been exacerbated with the roadworks that are there. But even without the roadworks, we know of the growth. So are we looking at the broader Waimea Road, you know, flow, safety, etc.?
We will be. It's once we've got the outcome of the Nelson Future Access Strategy, we know where we stand with which level of intervention we're talking about, whether we're talking about bus lanes or walking and cycling strategies. It's all to do with the complete package of how the transport is going to be dealt with, and then we'll get down to the intersection level. We do the higher level first, which is the level we're at the moment, then we get down to the intersection level. And we're not at the intersection level yet.
I mean, while I totally agree with that strategically, I guess my overarching concern is that this council has waited for a number of studies over the years and has waited and waited. And, you know, look, due deference, I wasn't in this council, so there'll be detail I don't know around, you know, some of the studies and some of the reasons with some of the decisions. However, what I do know is, and it's not about this council, but over those 15 years, and so I don't think anyone here was, you know, here 15 years ago, but over those 15 plus years, the impacts on Waimea Road and those areas have increased. The flow has increased, the flow has decreased, the amount of people using it has increased, the safety has decreased, etc. And, surely, we know NZTA can approve temporary fixes. McGlashan and Richmond Deviation was actually a temporary fix that came in about 15 plus years ago and is still there. So I'm just, concerned that we are in a waiting pattern without any resolutions.
Sorry, through the chair, can I just step in here? We hear your frustration. We're in exactly the same position. We would love to have been addressed this earlier, but we haven't exactly been ignoring Waimea Road. About 2009, 2010, there was a safety report done on a couple of the intersections along there. Market Road was one of them. It didn't stack up for a project. The business case didn't stack up. So nothing was done, so it wouldn't have got funding. It doesn't rate particularly highly at the moment on our risk register, so it's not sort of jumping out of this as being a real issue to be dealt with urgently. But we do monitor those sorts of things. If it was becoming a significant problem, then we would have probably intervened earlier, but at this stage it's not coming up as a real, NZTA would have highlighted it to us as well as being a risk intersection, because they do let us know when they see those sorts of intersections and risks coming up on the register.
I just suggest with all of the development that's happened in that area since 2009 and 10, it's probably another one that needs to be monitored.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. My question relates to 5.1, which is the staff costs behind budget by 326,000. It just doesn't say why. Most of the items give a reason, and that one is not there.
Through the chair, vacancies are predominantly why that's behind.
Okay, so that also relates to 9.2. We were talking about consultants coming in. That's the shortfall there, but it talks about at 9.2, the cost for the external resources are unaccounted and poses a risk to the operational expenditure budget. So is that a warning to us that you're going to come back for some more money?
So through the chair, I can't speak specifically on staff, the overall staff costs of the infrastructure department. I can only speak of the utility side. So we've had one very recent resignation, so we got one vacancy as of Monday. So that said, that we know that our activity engineers their workload is very high at the moment. They are having to be involved in cross-council issues. Their primary role is to do activity management, and they are having to support council in other areas. So we're highlighting this issue. We're looking at what support I can provide my staff so that I can maintain their well-being, all those other aspects. So I'm having to make a judgment call and saying we need to get some external resources in, which will be funded from my wastewater, water, flood protection, stormwater activity accounts.
Okay.
So I have highlighted it as a risk. We will endeavour to do what we can to balance out the total overall activities, but there's an underlying risk, and that's what I just wanted to bring to council's attention.
So that was as at the end of December. Have you had any good news since then? Is there any change in that situation?
We've had one vacancy, so potentially staff costs have reduced, but I don't see that as a particular positive, because it's probably putting more strain on our staff.
Yeah, okay.
Again, and that role was very helpful for activity management.
So that's something that, so with both of those, it would be good to have a little bit of an explanation as to why, just that, there are vacancies, just so that I don't have to ask the question really. And the other question I've got relates to parking regulation income, and I see that it's less than budget by 51,000, but looking to be under budget by 115,000 for the full year. Why is that?
Through the chair, sorry, Councillor Noonan, what page are you on?
5.2, it's the third bullet point.
Page number?
49, sorry.
Thank you. Parking income, and your question is why is it down?
Why is it looking, well, it's down already, but it's looking to be down for the full year by 115. Is there any reason for that?
That's really a question I'd have to ask Mrs Bishop, who looks after our contractors, but anecdotally, there aren't as many infringement tickets being written. Why? I'm sorry, I can't comment.
Okay, maybe for the next report, we can have a bit of a better look, given that it's projected to get worse.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I have a couple of questions. The first question is, I've had quite a few messages on Facebook wanting to know why we're putting traffic lights along Waimea Road rather than roundabouts, and I think it's quite a complex issue in terms of safety, but from a climate change perspective, the argument is that we should be doing roundabouts. Can you touch on that briefly? And also you mentioned potential of another set of traffic lights at Motueka Street. So how do you resolve congestion versus, because my understanding is roundabouts are far more dangerous for walkers and cyclists, but they do improve traffic flow. How do you resolve congestion, people sitting in cars and that pollution of that versus safety?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Is this relevant to us accepting this report?
Well, I think because there's some stuff around Waimea Road safety, so I'm just curious. And there's
Consideration of roundabouts is not part of this report in that area. Potentially this is a question that could have been asked prior to the meeting.
Yeah, that's a question that's been asked and answered in this forum several times. And it's essentially, the answer is that the roundabout can't fit in the available space.
It can't fit in there. Okay, so further down as well, none of them.
Yep. That question has been, that decision was reached many years ago.
I appreciate that, but I'm just trying to understand how, I don't know the answer to the question of how you resolve, through a climate lens, how do you resolve, climate versus safety lens, how do you resolve that, Mark?
Okay, look, I won't allow the question about the roundabout. It's been asked and answered. It's outside the scope of what the quarter report is about.
Okay, fine.
Any other
Mark can answer that to me.
Councillor
I have another question.
Yeah, another question.
So it's with regards to Washington Valley Stormwater Upgrade, page 85, and St Vincent Street Sewer Renewal, page 79. St Vincent Street Sewer Renewal's just started, and there's some traffic lights set up there. Have you turned your mind to congestion, and how do you fit in the cycle network? How do you when you're doing your traffic management plans for roadworks, how do you plan for cycle safety and pedestrian safety there? Having nearly been knocked off my bike there yesterday.
Certainly. Through the chair, any traffic management plan is in, it complies with COPTM, which is the Code of Practice for Temporary Traffic Management, which has got a huge safety lens over it. So any works that we're doing that require a traffic management plan, which is put together by somebody called an STMS, I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for, I'm sorry, and comes to council for approval, does take into account walking and cycling needs. Okay. So, and I mean, that doesn't mean there's going to be a red carpet laid out all of the time. There is no disputing the fact that roadwork can be disruptive, and at times all mode users will need to compromise getting through that site in order to do so safely. But it is signed off. There's quite a procedure around COPTM and traffic management plans that should take into account all modes.
And is the timing of those two projects being timed separately so that you don't have disruption really nearby?
Through the chair, no, the timing hasn't been considered separately. The Washington Valley project has historically been delayed.
Yes.
Whilst though they are close with one another, the timing is just a coincidence that they've been timed that way.
Okay, so do you turn your minds to potential disruption for that entire sort of triangle of...
So, through the chair, when we do projects, such as when we're working on Waimea Road, when we did Hamden Street, we appreciated that was a main arterial road, so we liaised with NZTA to make sure that Rocks Road had minimal works going on it. So for the bigger schemes, we're aware of that. For the smaller schemes, we do actually consider it, and I know the Washington Valley project, they are saying what effects is that going to have on traffic and what detours, what extra information do we need to have. So they are thought about at a local level.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanting to come to the page 63, which is the Railway Reserve Pedestrian Drive Underpass. There's a comment, just wondering if we've got any update just in terms of timing, because it's marked as red.
Certainly through the chair, if I could invite Mrs Dawkins down to the table, she has absolutely at the coalface of the timeframes of that project, so she'll be able to give you a detailed answer. Thank you.
And just by way of introductions, Rebecca is a team leader that works for Lois in the capital delivery side. She started off as a cadet, has gone full circle, and is now back with us, which we are we're really happy for her to be back with us.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Yes, so the underpass is well underway, and you will have seen plenty of work happening up there as part of the Coastal Views development. So you will have seen the intersection of Princess Drive and Waimea Road taking place. The road is now up to almost finished formation level, so the level you see now is the level that the road will intersect at. And as part of that works, the underpass is following along very closely. So next week, work will commence to divert cyclists from the Railway Reserve around the side of the work sites and up Waimea Road inside the temporary traffic management. So there's already a facility for cyclists to be removed from the main traffic lane inside the water-filled barriers. That will become the main route for cyclists heading north and south whilst the underpass dig-out is commenced. So you'll be cycling from Nelson and you'll be detoured around the site, up Waimea Road and then back onto the Railway Reserve. And that work will probably take the next 3 or 4 months.
Because that's really helpful, thank you. I just wanted a couple of comments on that, if I could. I want to thank you for how quickly you responded to the request about the signage for cyclists, to try and get the cyclists, across and onto that. It's a very, it's got tricky in the middle of a big construction project on our busiest road. So this is, one of the challenges with Waimea Road, that it is, putting the interventions along it for improving cross-flow. It creates some challenges on our busiest roads. So I understand for those of you new to this discussion on Waimea Road, we've got reports on it of every intersection. It's complex, but we've got to get that strategic case sorted out. Just one thing I do want to address through you, Mr. Chair, with the committee is at the last infrastructure committee, you were, there was an indication that this particular matter was originally consented to connect to Beatson Road. That is not the case. There has only ever been, and so I know it was reported and reported again, and Scar is perfectly entitled to rely on it, but that is not the case. There has only ever been a consent to connect at this point and variations made around it. And Ms Macaulay's gone back and she's worked her way all through the consenting processes. It's an old consent. So I just don't want the committee to be left, or the public, with the information that at some point there was a consent for this project to go elsewhere. It's been designed in that location for some time, right through the process, and went through a notified resource consent hearing, and there's been variations to it, but one of those variations was not to change the location. Clearly, getting that subdivision done and connecting it in some way isn't easy. But this is the position that's been chosen, and I just want to thank the staff for the way they're working through this. But please encourage that we just get encourage you've been in great communication on it, and I just want to encourage you to just keep doing that in terms of the public, because obviously cycle safety is critically important, and we know that there are risks when we come to the other side of the road. Thank you. But thank you.
Yes, 2 now. So just picking up on what I've heard from the Mayor, the experts are here, so I can ask them through the chair. Am I right in thinking, however, that the developers originally wanted the road to connect with Beatson Road? There may not have been a consent for a road going down to Beatson Road, but my understanding is originally the developers wanted the road to connect with Beatson Road, and the reason we are paying for the traffic lights and the underpass is because council said, no, not Beatson Road, where, by the way, there is a road connecting to the site at the moment. We want you to go down to Waimea Road.
I'll get Mr.
Point of order. Point of order?
Point of order, what's the point of order?
Well, somebody else want to make one, I'm certainly going to. I'll let somebody else.
I'm just, through the chair, Mr. Chairman, I'm just clarifying what I've just heard from the Mayor, Her Worship the Mayor, who has said that she was concerned that she didn't want the committee or the public to think that there had been a consent granted for a road connecting to Beatson. The point I'm making is, I accept that, the point I'm making is originally the reason that perception is out there, or a perception like that is out there, is because the developers originally wanted to connect to Beatson. Is that correct, through the chair?
Right.
So the point of order is, how is that relevant to us passing this piece of business?
No, it's not, but it has been raised as zero, so I'll get Mr. Levertis to respond to that question.
Thank you.
So, sorry, through the chair, I was actually going to respond just to a statement that Councillor Laurie made in terms of us saying that the council is paying for the intersection and the underpass. That's not the case. The developer is paying for the road and the signalised intersections, and as per our reports, we are paying for the underpass. I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. And so, point of clarity, we are paying, however, because of that decision, for the changes to the railway reserve.
Yes, as a result of that road joining into Waimea Road, yes.
So my question's about, can I get an answer to my original question?
No, it's outside the scope of this.
Can I ask about the culvert?
The what?
About the culvert that we were just discussing?
Culvert, yes.
Yeah, so through the chair, the culvert, will it, can we just be reminded how long it's going to be, how wide it's going to be, what its gradient will be like, and whether or not it will have lighting?
Yeah, we've had this discussion, but if you like, you've got the drawings there, Rebecca?
Yeah. Through the chair, the drawings are on the Nelson City Council website, Shape Nelson page.
Oh, yeah. And if you'd like to have a look at the drawings, they're over there.
Drawings address whether or not there'll be lighting.
Through the chair, the culvert is fully lit.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'd have to say that when we had the discussions that, I want to draw a line under this, but when we made the decision, I was asked by Mr. Levertis that we had to make a decision before Christmas about the culvert. Enjoyed with the deputy chair and enjoyed the mayor to make a decision. Basically, is it a go or no go decision? Cycle safety and pedestrian safety was the predominant was the overriding consideration. At stage, the cost was an at-grade crossing, so that would have been cyclists and walkers using the railway reserve would have come up to the intersection, crossed at the roadway, and then on again. And we were of the view that that was not safe. The safer option was an underpass, so that cyclists and walkers and vulnerable road users have an unimpeded access across that roadway. And there's a cost with that.
Just got one, and it's on that item regarding the NZTA subsidy, whether there's any update on whether that's progressing.
Mr. Levertis?
Through the chair, no, but it is something that I'm following up on a weekly basis.
A question I asked Mr. Levertis recently as a week ago.
On a weekly basis. And it's one of the first things I do
every Monday morning. If there are no further questions, I'll move the receipt.
It's been moved, Councillor Noonan, seconded Councillor Edgar. Question from Councillor Laurie, Councillor
Rainey. I do appreciate, regarding the culvert, I do appreciate the update in terms of the process that was undertaken in terms of that consent. And from the Mayor, I do appreciate the fact that the original consent was connecting to Waimea Road. I am interested in the point that the Mayor brought up, and I would like clarification on this, please, that it was a notified consent. Because I was under the impression from start that it was a non-notified consent. So can I get clarification? And if it was a notified consent, I want to know when that was, please.
Maybe that now I can tell it. Yes, it was a notified consent. There was an independent commissioner and 2 councillors, I think 2001, went through a notified process. It had subsequent variations to it, quite a few of them, but none of them vary the connection point.
So it was a notified consent 2001. Right, I think... yeah. Right, no further questions. It's been moved. It's been seconded. Moved Councillor Noonan, seconded Councillor Edgar. I'll put the motion. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Right, that concludes the public part of the Infrastructure Committee. We have a very brief public excluded. It should take about 30 seconds. So move that we move into public excluded. Move Councillor Skinner, seconded. Councillor Brand, those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. We're now public excluded.